In the picturesque city of Spokane, a sinister shadow lurked as serial killer was on the loose. It was here, beneath the surface of tranquility, that the body of Kathy Brisboe was ultimately discovered. The man they were hunting had two dark obsessions. He preyed upon prostitutes, driven by an insatiable obsession with weapons. Law enforcement knew they were dealing with someone who possessed an arsenal of firearms. Clinical evidence from a doctor painted a harrowing portrait of a potentially dangerous individual. Douglas Perry was the gun-obsessed murderer targeting vulnerable sex workers. However, tracking him down would prove to be an arduous task. By 1994, he identified as a woman trapped in a man's body, a self-described transsexual. It was in the distant land of Thailand that Douglas Perry underwent a transformation, emerging as Donna Perry. As detectives in Spokane grappled with the latest discovery of a body, one haunting question echoed in their minds. What horrors lay concealed within the psyche of a serial killer? If the Spokane River could speak, it would tell a myriad of stories, not all of them pleasant. Once teeming with salmon on their upstream journey, the river's vitality was stifled by a dam erected in the 19th century. Today, the rainbow trout caught from its waters are deemed unfit for human consumption, poisoned by years of industrial pollution. Along its banks, a chilling series of murders unfolded, casting a dark shadow over the landscape. These heinous acts were the work of a man burdened by a deeply disturbed mind. He felt cornered, perhaps for the first time, and was desperate to escape the tightening grasp of his own creation. He had lingered too long and made too much noise. Rather than conceal his crimes, he left the bodies exposed, as if daring anyone to find them. From this vantage point, one could easily see the remnants of his brutality. Just like his previous victims, there was no attempt to hide the bodies. Yolanda Sapp, Nikki Lowy, and Kathy Brisboe were disposed of without remorse, discarded like mere trash. The three murders transpired over a span of 3 months at the dawn of 1990. All three women, sex workers, were last seen in the area of Eastbrook Avenue, their lives cut short by a remorseless killer. The man behind these brutal killings was none other than Douglas Perry. It would take law enforcement 22 long years to bring him to justice. By the time he was apprehended, he was no longer Douglas. He had transformed into Donna. Donna Perry revealed that one of the motivations for her sex reassignment surgery was a desperate belief that removing her male genitals would eradicate the violent impulses that haunted her. She clung to the hope that she would no longer harbor the desire to kill. Harry remarked, "Doe didn't stop at Donna." What turned Douglas Perry into a serial killer, and why did Donna bring that to an end? She believed that the desire to kill had vanished. Harry probed further. What about the darkness that didn't cease with Donna? What factors transformed Douglas Perry into a serial killer, and why did Donna halt that cycle? To unravel the enigma of Douglas Perry's mind, one must start in the serene countryside of Washington state. He was raised in an orchard in Omak, located in the state's north-central region. This rural landscape, characterized by farming and ranching communities, seemed idyllic. He was brought up in this orchard by his father, mother, and older brother. It appeared to be a normal upbringing. Yet, this was merely the surface. Beneath the veneer of normalcy lay a harrowing truth. He endured molestation at the hands of his father, bullying from family members, and the torment of emotional, sexual, and physical abuse. He was, in essence, a deeply troubled child. In the midst of chaos, his best friends became guns. Douglas developed a profound affinity for firearms, treating them with a love that transcended mere ownership. When he spoke of a weapon, it was as though it took on a life of its own, and he fell passionately in love with each piece. After the death of his father in 1968 from a burst blood vessel, his mother, now the sole caregiver, was institutionalized due to her schizophrenia. This left Douglas to forge a bond with guns, which quickly became his lifelong obsession. By 1974, at the age of 21, Douglas Perry had amassed an impressive collection of firearms, indulging in his hobby of hoarding weapons. He tended to their every need, firing them into the expansive Washington countryside long into the night, surrounded by a cacophony of pistols, rifles, shotguns, and an endless supply of ammunition. Douglas Perry was a man transformed, preparing for battle. Once an abused child, he had now grown into someone willing and able to defend himself. His criminal record from the 1970s revealed a history of assault and various weapon-related charges. Psychologist Linda Papadopoulos had been meticulously unraveling the complexities of Perry's life, seeking to unlock the secrets buried within his mind. By 1990, he found himself in Spokane, Washington, where a year prior, he had been apprehended for soliciting a prostitute in his new environment. This behavior pointed to a troubling obsession with sex workers. It was evident that he frequently engaged their services. In fact, there seemed to be no significant relationships in his life outside these transactional interactions. What does this indicate about the intricate psyche of Douglas Perry? This suggests a deep discomfort with social relationships, a feeling of inability to connect meaningfully with others. Or perhaps, more sinisterly, what he valued in these relationships was the power to dictate terms, to control, and ultimately, to exploit. Douglas Perry's mindset reflected a disturbing trend, the commodification and objectification of women. By 1989, it was clear he posed a significant threat, a man prone to violence. His life revolved around firearms and his interactions with sex workers. But there was another layer, his disdain for women. He regarded them as disgusting and vile. This contempt was particularly directed at those in the sex trade. He described them to a cellmate as pond scum while serving time for weapon offenses. In a chilling and unverified claim, he allegedly confessed to his cellmate that he had murdered as many as 9 prostitutes, killing them because he deemed them pond scum. He claimed to harbor a deep-seated hatred for prostitutes, believing they could have children while he could not. He felt they were squandering their potential. Despite this animosity, by 1990, Perry was frequently mingling with sex workers in Spokane, a city that projected an image of urban sophistication and affluence. However, the reality for these workers was starkly different. Hidden from view, the city harbored pockets where the chic facade gave way to the harsh reality of cheap sex. Among them was Yolanda Sapp, a mere 26 years old, who prepared each evening to engage in her trade in the Sprague area. Her preferred spot lay just a mile from the river. It is crucial to remember that no matter the choices they made, whether driven by addiction or other circumstances, these women were cherished daughters, friends, and sisters. Regardless of their paths, they remained valued individuals. At 37, Douglas Perry was all too familiar with the area. With a chilling dual obsession, his loathing for prostitutes and his passion for guns, he prowled Spokane's red light district, where Yolanda Sapp was preparing for a night of work. As she readied herself to meet her next client, Yolanda unknowingly approached a man who regarded sex workers as the scum of the earth. This was a man who saw women as inferior, viewing sex workers as disposable, as if their humanity had been stripped away. Not far from the river, in a desolate area near East Trent Road in Spokane, Perry had already surveyed the landscape. He parked his vehicle in a location that had remained unchanged over the years, often serving as a turnaround point. This secluded spot, mostly obscured from Trent Avenue, had long been a hideaway where young people might gather to drink and engage in reckless behavior. The sounds of the Great Spokane River could easily mask any cries for help. On February 21, 1990, Douglas Perry sat in his car, armed and consumed by a murderous urge, his mind racing with plans to evade capture on the streets of Spokane. On February 21, 1990, Douglas Perry sat in his car, armed with a gun and an insatiable urge to kill. He had crafted a meticulous plan to evade capture as he prowled the streets of Spokane, ready to strike. Yolanda Sapp was a vibrant young woman, beloved by her boyfriend and sought after by those willing to pay for her companionship. Like any young woman, she harbored dreams of love and acceptance. In her search for connection, it's likely that Yolanda approached Douglas Perry's car, believing he could provide her with what she desired. When she inquired if he was looking to party, it became evident that Douglas's relationship with his firearms and the sex workers was obsessive and troubling. His troubled associations with women allowed him to unleash pent-up rage. Douglas was familiar with the ritual of hiring sex workers, and upon inviting Yolanda into his vehicle, they drove away towards his home. But it quickly became apparent that Perry had no intention of engaging in sexual activities. Within hours of picking up Yolanda Sapp, he shot her 3 times and drove towards the river. There, he intended to dispose of her lifeless body. The following day, February 22 end, Yolanda was reported missing. Soon, concerned passersby on the trail overlooking the river alerted the police. When authorities arrived, they discovered Yolanda's feet bound with a distinctive green blanket. Her body lay exposed, stripped of dignity, as if it were a trophy on display. The report detailing the discovery of this young woman's body revealed a profound disregard for her humanity. Her breasts and genitalia were laid bare, suggesting that Douglas Perry was not merely attempting to conceal his crimes. Instead, he aimed to convey a chilling message. This was his signature, a grotesque display of his victims, showcased like trophies. In a bitter irony, Douglas had known these women as friends of his girlfriend, deepening the horror of his betrayal. Douglas's girlfriend was also a sex worker, and he often brought food to the women on the streets. Yet, behind this facade of kindness lurked a sinister intent. He had a complex relationship with the prostitutes who worked in that neighborhood. He would often frequent the same streets, presenting himself as a benefactor. He later told police he had been feeding these women and bringing them to his home, a claim corroborated by witnesses who saw him in action. Douglas sought to project an image of a man trying to help. However, this facade belied a deeper conflict within him. He simultaneously revered and reviled women. In his eyes, the mother was a divine figure, capable of creation, while the sex worker represented the dark underbelly of society, devoid of life and nurturing. This internal struggle manifested as he oscillated between his role as a nurturing figure and the destructive force he believed he had to become. He fantasized about embodying a maternal archetype, yet deep down, he knew he could never achieve such ideals. Instead, he rationalized his violence as a means to cleanse what he deemed the pawn scum of the earth. He had killed once, but it would not be the last. In the depths of his fractured psyche, Douglas Perry grappled with a duality that defined his existence. On one side, he yearned to embody a nurturing mother figure, aspiring for redemption and a better self. Yet deep down, he was painfully aware that this aspiration was forever out of reach. Instead, he sought to balance his internal turmoil by targeting those he deemed unworthy, referring to them in his chilling vernacular as the pawn scum of the earth. He had tasted blood once, but the darkness within him was insatiable, and it would not be long before he struck again. With each new victim, he attempted to justify his actions, rationalizing his brutality as a twisted form of balance. The cycle of violence was not merely a choice, it was a compulsion that he could not resist. Despite the chilling nature of the crime, Douglas Perry was not initially regarded as a suspect in the murder of Yolanda Sapp. His criminal history, which revealed a range of offenses from simple assault to more serious crimes, did not place him in the frame for such brutality. Yet, the shadows of his past hinted at a more sinister potential. Most of Perry's prior offenses were firearm-related, raising alarms about his potential for violence. He roamed free, a predator stalking the vulnerable. The news of Yolanda's brutal murder reverberated through the community, instilling fear among local sex workers. The brutal slaying of one of their own, a young woman, created a palpable atmosphere of dread. The haunting reality of their lives was underscored by the violent fate that had befallen Yolanda. In the dimly lit motel rooms, strewn with barbed wire and locked doors off East Sprague in Spokane, Nikki Lowe, a 35-year-old known to police for her struggles with addiction, worked as a prostitute. Her life was fraught with danger and desperation. In those seedy motel rooms, Nikki Lowe, recognized by law enforcement as a drug user, sought refuge and clients. She navigated a treacherous existence, often drifting towards districts filled with warehouses and dark alleyways. On any given night, she might wander into the shadowy alleys or head down the main roads that crossed the Spokane River. One particular green street, marked by a busy underpass, was a familiar haunt for her. As she climbed into a car, the couple made their way to Perry's home. On March 25, 1990, they traveled a mile from the underpass on East South Riverton, unaware of the fate that awaited her. They drove through the night, but Nikki Lowe would never return. Her lifeless body was later discovered, draped over a guardrail, discarded like trash, a haunting image of a life extinguished. When asked if he was looking for a good time, Douglas Perry emerged as a figure with a disturbing obsession. His fixation with firearms, coupled with his interactions with local sex workers, painted a portrait of a man ready to unleash his dark impulses. Having driven Nikki to his home, he enacted his meticulously crafted ritual of violence. The murder was staged, a grotesque display that spoke volumes about the killer's mindset. Nikki's body, treated with chilling indifference, was left as a grim reminder of her tragic end. In a chilling pattern, he placed the bodies of his victims in the very locations where they would later be discovered. This act of dehumanization was laced with a sense of arrogance as he rationalized his horrific deeds. He grotesquely justified his actions by claiming these women were unnecessary in society. In his warped reasoning, he believed he was doing the world a favor by eliminating those he deemed unworthy. This twisted logic revealed not only his monstrous nature, but also a disturbing sense of pride. As detectives combed the area for evidence, they stumbled upon a nearby dumpster filled with items that would soon tell a story of horror. Among the discarded items, they found a sweater, a pair of blue tennis shoes, sex lubricant, and a hypodermic syringe. Each piece of evidence pointed back to Nikki Lowy. Yet at that moment, the evidence did not implicate Douglas Perry. He remained a free man, lurking in the shadows. 51 days after the discovery of Nikki Lowy's body, Kathy Brisboe left downtown Spokane to return to the area where she worked as a sex worker, blissfully unaware of the danger that awaited her. Just 200 yards from the river, on a road named East Trent, Douglas Perry's predatory gaze fell upon her. Armed with one of his small-caliber weapons, he was ready to strike again, driven by the same dark impulses that had already claimed 2 lives. Later that fateful night, Kathy Brisboe found herself in the company of Douglas Perry, who had lured her to a secluded location he frequented. This was a place he knew all too well, one that would soon become the backdrop of a heinous act. As they drove along the embankment, the dirt mound loomed ominously in the distance. It was clear they had come here for a sexual encounter, the nature of which remained shrouded in ambiguity. Was it consensual, or had something darker taken root? Suddenly, something must have triggered a deep-seated fear within Kathy, prompting her desperate attempt to flee. In her frantic escape, she lost her coat and shoes, leaving behind traces of her struggle. The jacket was later discovered in the vicinity, suggesting that Kathy had managed to outpace Perry for a moment. As she reached the bottom of the hill, it became evident she was fleeing for her life, and the first drops of blood began to appear along the path. Though he may have inflicted injury upon her higher up the slope, the blood would not show until she descended. Kathy had confided in her fellow sex workers that if she were ever abducted, she would fight tooth and nail to survive. In that harrowing moment, Kathy Brisboe was indeed fighting for her life. Little did she know, her fierce resistance would eventually lead to the arrest of a woman named Donna. Years later, thousands of miles away from the Spokane River, Kathy's story continued to unfold. Her struggle with Douglas Perry persisted as they grappled along the embankment, their desperate scuffle echoing through time. Near the Spokane River, with every ounce of strength, Kathy fought back, clutching at his arms. This visceral struggle allowed her to collect crucial DNA evidence beneath her fingernails, including fragments of skin from her assailant. This evidence was not from merely grasping at his clothing or hair. It was likely that in the heat of the moment, she had scratched his skin, leaving behind a trail of vital forensic material. This evidence would remain preserved for 2 decades, a silent witness to the violence that unfolded. The chaotic encounter led them down to what is now known as the Centennial Trail, where detectives could trace the path of their struggle, starting from this very location. As the investigation unfolded, detectives began to notice blood droplets and clumps of hair scattered on the ground. Just beyond a nearby bush, a patch of sungrass caught their attention. Continuing past that point, a vantage point revealed a chilling sight. Her body was visible from the edge above. It became clear that one of the guns, which Douglas Perry considered family, had silenced Kathy's cries. She was shot in the head and chest, left to die at the foot of this desolate trail. The underbrush had thinned since that fateful day, but Kathy's body lay in this very area, halfway down the embankment. Spokane was reeling from the tragic loss of 3 women. In a mere 4 months, 3 sex workers had been brutally murdered, all in the same vicinity, posed in eerily similar ways. The sheer number of coincidences raised alarm bells. All had fallen victim to firearms. It was clear a serial killer lurked among them. Authorities soon launched a task force in 1990 to pursue this elusive predator. However, DNA technology at the time required a significant volume of blood to yield results. The DNA collected from the crime scene belonged to Kathy, not her murderer, leaving investigators desperate for more evidence. With limited leads, the focus shifted to trace evidence, and fibers emerged as a crucial lead. Green fibers were discovered throughout the investigation, a common thread connecting the victims. Fibers recovered from Kathy Brisboe's clothing were found in a desolate area. Green fibers were also identified on the second victim, Nikki Lowy, and on a green blanket binding the legs of Yolanda Sapp. Yet, this evidence ultimately led detectives down a labyrinth of dead ends. Countless suspects emerged, many of whom were sex workers with drug dependencies, linked to unsavory characters, drug dealers, and pimps who ruled their lives with an iron fist. Surprisingly, Douglas Perry's name did not raise immediate suspicion. With a history of firearms violations, his name surfaced in connection with weapons, but not in these heinous murders. The fingernails of Kathy Brisboe were preserved, fragments of skin trapped beneath them, perhaps one day holding the key to a breakthrough. However, the fragments were too minuscule to provide viable DNA readings. As the months dragged on without credible leads, the case grew cold, and Douglas Perry roamed free. By the mid-1990s, Perry. Many of the women in this grim setting were sex workers, entangled in the web of drug addiction. This connection often led them to dangerous individuals, drug dealers, and pimps who were known for their brutality. Despite this environment, Douglas Perry's persona went unnoticed, raising no alarms concerning the murders of these vulnerable women. Though Douglas Perry had come under scrutiny for firearms violations, the murders of these women had eluded him. Kathy Brisboe's fingernails were meticulously preserved, a testament to the hope that one day they might provide answers. Hidden beneath those nails were tiny fragments of skin. These fragments were minuscule, offering no immediate DNA profile, yet the potential for future identification lingered. As months slipped by without credible leads, the case grew cold, allowing Douglas Perry to remain at large. By the mid-1990s, Douglas Perry began to confront the truth of his identity. He had seemingly made the decision to transition, embracing the name Donna. By 1994, he identified as a woman trapped in a man's body, referring to himself as a transsexual, setting the stage for a complex and harrowing narrative of transformation. Douglas Perry's complex life was marked by relationships with both women and men. He projected the image of a male prostitute, often toggling between his dual personas Doe and Donna. In 1998, his criminal activities caught up with him once again. Prison had done little to stifle his compulsions. He continued to roam the streets of Spokane, seeking out encounters. Following a date, he was approached by police after a concerned woman flagged them down. He had invited a young woman back to his home, but her excitement quickly turned to horror when she discovered the array of weapons he kept. An arsenal that included not just guns, but also crossbows and other terrifying paraphernalia. Despite the ominous atmosphere, he assured her he meant no harm, claiming he liked her. Yet, shaken by the experience, she insisted on sharing her story with the first police officer she encountered. She relayed the chilling details of her date, prompting police to stop him for questioning. Her alarm raised, the officers quickly discovered the extent of his dangerously disordered life. When they searched his residence, the findings were staggering. Police uncovered 5 pipe bombs, 49 guns, and an astounding 20,000 rounds of ammunition, revealing a deeply unsettling reality. The investigation further unveiled incriminating evidence buried within the paperwork. A psychological assessment unearthed by the police painted a grim picture, attesting to his pathological tendencies. The investigation revealed deeply troubling feelings and beliefs about women harbored by Douglas Perry. His intense misogyny and violent tendencies were laid bare in a series of writings, which drew alarming connections to his mental health issues. Reports from mental health professionals detailed his disdain and disgust for women. The police now faced a daunting reality. They were dealing with an individual who possessed an arsenal of weapons, indicating a clear predisposition towards violence. Coupled with this arsenal, clinical evidence from a doctor signaled that this person could indeed be dangerous. The Spokane police were confronted with the unsettling truth that they were tracking a man with psychotic issues, someone who harbored an intense hatred for women. The psychological assessment they obtained on Perry underscored this disturbing insight. The assessment painted a grim picture of Douglas Perry, confirming suspicions of his mental instability and deep-seated misogyny. It hinted at another layer of complexity in his psyche. This psychological profile provided the police with their first glimpse into Perry's gender dysphoria, revealing that he was contemplating undergoing a sex change. Within the report, the doctor meticulously outlined the steps Perry would need to take to live as a female, laying bare the turmoil within him. This assessment suggested a disturbing dichotomy as he grappled with violent impulses and misogynistic views. He also struggled with an identity crisis, caught between the man he was and the woman he wished to become. At that time, Perry was incarcerated for offenses related to his stockpile of weapons, not yet considered a murder suspect, much less a serial killer. During his sentence, he was transferred to a specialized institution. This facility focused on mental health issues, largely due to Perry's own claims of being diagnosed with paranoid personality disorder. It was within the confines of this mental health facility that Perry began to unburden his conscience to a fellow inmate, revealing chilling details about the women he had killed. He expressed his vile disgust and hatred for women, derogatorily referring to prostitutes as pond scum. His contempt ran deeper. He admitted hating them for their ability to procreate, viewing those women as a waste for squandering their bodies. These confessions, shared with a cellmate, would later prove invaluable for the prosecution. However, it would take 14 long years for this testimony to come into play. Upon his release, Douglas Perry felt compelled to take drastic action. No longer wishing to live as a man, Douglas Perry was finally released from prison in 2000 after serving 2 years for weapons offenses. He was determined to confront the gender dysphoria that had plagued him. With a newfound sense of purpose, Douglas Perry gathered enough funds to travel to Thailand, where he would undergo sex reassignment surgery. It was in this foreign land that Douglas Perry transformed into Donna Perry, seizing the chance to finally confront his true identity. But did Douglas Perry anticipate that one day he might face justice as a serial killer? If so, was this transformation an attempt to evade the law? Some speculated that this drastic change was a strategic move to throw the police off his trail. While he confided in his cellmate about the murders, he had yet to confess to law enforcement. Was he leaving the country and altering his appearance and gender out of a genuine desire to embrace his identity, or was he simply trying to avoid accountability for his heinous crimes? If evasion was his goal, it was a success. Douglas Perry was left behind in Thailand, while Donna Perry returned to the United States. This unsettling reality posed significant challenges for the murder squad detectives back in Spokane, Washington, who continued their relentless investigation. The detectives pondered whether Perry's actions were driven by a genuine fear of being held accountable for his past. As they delved deeper into the case, the shadows of Perry's past loomed large, complicating their pursuit of justice. In the year 2000, Donna Perry returned to the United States. This revelation posed a significant challenge for the murder squad detectives. Back in Spokane, Washington, the investigation was underway. A 10-year-old murder case involving 3 women loomed heavily over the detectives, who were convinced they were searching for a man. Perhaps they would uncover the elusive Douglas Perry, but their focus remained on a male suspect. Little did they know, the same man who harbored such hatred for women would ultimately transform into the very woman he despised. As a homicide detective, unraveling this case felt like searching for a ghost. It seemed as though Douglas Perry had vanished without a trace. The investigation, stymied and stagnant, would languish in darkness for another 9 years. However, advances in DNA technology invigorated the Spokane detectives, including Jim Dressback. They decided to send Kathy Brisbo's fingernails, still preserved in evidence, to a lab in Marysville, Washington. In 2009, just 6 months after the case reached the Marysville lab, a scientist reached out with thrilling news. In a tone filled with anticipation, she urged, "Ask me to sit down." The gravity of her words hinted at momentous discovery. The scientist revealed she had developed a full male DNA profile from the skin found under Kathy Brisbo's left middle finger. This was the breakthrough they had long awaited. With all other leads exhausted, the DNA profile of Kathy's killer was now a beacon of hope, anticipated to match a name in the national database known as CODIS. Would this profile lead them to Douglas Perry? Now a woman, how would that complicate the investigation? In 2009, a shard of skin, evidence of a desperate struggle, had finally yielded a DNA profile nearly 2 decades post-murder. Yet there was no match in the database. This absence of a match opened a new chapter in their pursuit. With a complete male profile established, the detectives had a suspect to investigate. They reached out to numerous individuals, collecting a dozen reference samples from potential suspects. These individuals had lingered in the shadows of suspicion for years. They had not been eliminated, yet neither had they been implicated due to insufficient evidence. The detectives gathered the samples, sending them off for analysis, hopeful for a breakthrough. The investigation team had their work cut out for them. With a full male DNA profile in hand, they set out to interview potential suspects. City detectives collected dozens of reference samples, hoping to unravel the mystery. Until this point, Perry had never provided a sample, leaving the case in limbo. Yet, as fate would have it, the door to resolution was about to swing wide open. Perry's obsession with firearms had not waned. Upon transitioning, Donna Perry may have altered her appearance, but inside, she remained unchanged. In 2012, at the age of 62, Donna Perry was arrested for possessing illegal firearms, facing yet another federal charge. By then, DNA collection had become a federal mandate. Once incarcerated, individuals must provide a sample of their DNA. Thus, during her arrest, a buccal swab was taken, swabbing the area between her cheek and gum, sealed in a box, and sent for analysis. The moment of truth arrived. Would the results confirm a match? Donna Perry, the serial killer formerly known as Douglas, was on the cusp of being confronted with her past. Fast forward to 2012, where DNA technology had advanced significantly. A federal mandate required that anyone incarcerated must provide a DNA sample. This regulatory shift proved crucial when the detectives took a sample from her. The detectives in Spokane were soon notified. The call from Marysville was electrifying. They had received a hit in CODISA name that echoed through the annals of their investigation: Donna Perry, a.k.a. Douglas Perry. As a detective, I could only imagine the weight of those results. The transformation may have been physical, but the truth of her identity was irrefutable. Her DNA constant in this turbulent sea of chaos remained unchanged despite the years. This consistency led to a pivotal moment. The detectives in Spokane were alerted after the sample was processed. Marysville's authorities reached out again, stating the unexpected news. They had a match in the CODIS database tied to the name of the DNA donor. The results pointed to Donna, formerly known as Douglas Perry. As a seasoned detective, I would have scrutinized the findings, recognizing the name Donna Perry immediately. In an unexpected twist, the investigators were left reeling at the revelation that they were pursuing a woman. The name Donna Perry had become synonymous with the case, turning years of assumptions on their head. Detective Jim Dressback and his team felt they had finally solidified their case. A critical piece of evidence, a fingerprint discovered on a bottle in a dumpster, linked directly to Donna Perry after the murder of Nikki Loa. DNA evidence, fingerprints, and circumstantial evidence painted a damning picture. Witnesses had seen Donna with the victims, and the testimony of her former cellmate from 1998 added a chilling layer. The cellmate recounted how Donna had confessed to the murders, leaving little doubt in the minds of investigators. As the officers prepared to confront her with the charges, they ensured she was alone in the room. When they returned to read the indictment, her reaction was immediate. The word murder slipped from their lips, prompting her incredulous response, "Murder? Who am I supposed to have murdered?" Donna Perry maintained her innocence, asserting that she had not taken a life. Throughout the interview, she drew a stark line between her current identity and her past as Douglas. She claimed that her gender reassignment surgery had been a means to tame her violent impulses. When pressed with pointed inquiries about the murders, she deflected, stating, "No, but it was 20 years ago, and if Douglas did, I don't know." This disassociation hinted at a defense strategy that investigators had anticipated. Despite the compelling scientific evidence, the detectives sought a confession. Their goal was to have her own words acknowledge the crime. However, Donna repeatedly insisted she had not killed anyone. In a curious moment, a colleague of Detective Max offered Donna Perry an opening, saying, "We know that when people kill more than one person, it tends to continue." What made this stop? Why did this stop? This question served two purposes: to probe for other potential victims, and to elicit an admission as she continued to deny any connection to the women. In a telling moment, Donna stated, "Well, Doe didn't stop, Donna stopped." This admission, though veiled, was as close to an acknowledgement of guilt as investigators had encountered during their lengthy interviews. After 22 long years, since the discovery of the bodies of 3 women in Riverside, Spokane police had honed in on their suspect. The looming question remained, would this woman now be found guilty of the horrific crimes? What emerged was a complex psychological landscape. Donna Perry's attempts to distance herself from her past were striking. She had previously tried to shift the blame, insisting, "I did nothing as Donna Perry." Her narrative hinged on the notion that her former identity as a man was responsible for the violence. She proclaimed, "I did nothing as this woman. It was all about this horrible man that I was." The question loomed large. Could someone who once identified as male now fully embrace a new identity and claim to have changed? The jury grappled with these statements. Ultimately, they unanimously rejected the defense put forth by Donna Perry, leading to her conviction. Psychologist Linda Papadopoulos weighed in on the matter, confirming the prevailing scientific consensus. She posited that Donna's claims were either a calculated attempt to manipulate the legal system or a manifestation of her own delusions. Papadopoulos argued that there was no correlation between gender dysphoria and psychopathy. Rather, It was Douglas Perry, the sadistic killer, who had committed these acts. The law would ultimately not distinguish between identities when it came to accountability. In a haunting declaration, she insisted, "I did nothing as this woman. It was all about this horrible man that I was." This raised an unsettling question. Could someone who once identified as male truly redefine themselves as female and claim transformation? "I'm changed. I haven't done those activities. That's not me. Douglas Perry is dead. I am Donna Perry," she proclaimed. Yet the jury saw through this narrative, unanimously rejecting the Donna Perry defense and delivering a guilty verdict. Psychologist Linda Papadopoulos weighed in, examining the depths of this claim. She articulated the prevailing scientific view, suggesting that it was merely a ruse, a desperate attempt to manipulate the legal system. Perhaps it was a misguided belief that her past violence was a result of testosterone. This notion reflected a troubling mindset. There was no scientifically supported link between gender dysphoria and psychopathic behavior. As investigators delved into the mind of Douglas Perry, they encountered a disturbing disconnect. His violent tendencies were not a manifestation of gender dysphoria, as some might speculate, but rather a chilling glimpse into the depths of a psychopathic psyche. The absence of any correlation between his identity struggles and his brutal actions painted a portrait of a man utterly lost in a labyrinth of his own making. There is absolutely no connection between Donna Perry's gender identity and the murders. The truth is far darker. Douglas Perry was a sadistic killer driven by a compulsion to harm. When examining the legal implications, in the tumultuous narrative of Donna Perry, formerly known as Douglas Perry, the question arises, did she understand that taking a life was wrong, that it stood in defiance of the law? The answer is unequivocally yes. Regardless of the gender she identified with, the moral and legal implications of her actions remained unchanged. Despite her transformation, she remained guilty of the heinous act of being a serial killer. The danger posed by Perry lies in the stark contrast between her appearance and her horrific capabilities. To the unsuspecting eye, she may seem like a meek, mild, and doddering old woman. Yet, beneath that unassuming facade, there lurked a potential for violence far beyond what one might expect. For seasoned detectives, the legal system's stance toward those who plead innocence based on a change of gender was a welcome relief. It established a critical precedent that held her accountable for the murders she committed. If this precedent had not been set, one could only imagine the number of murderers who might hastily pursue gender reassignment to evade justice, should they sense the law closing in on them. Perry's case complicated the understanding of gender dysphoria. It was not a matter of multiple personalities. Rather, it was the consistent traits of a deeply troubled individual. Her actions were not driven by confusion over her gender identity, but stemmed from a profound anger and violence directed toward women. Ultimately, whether she was male or female becomes nearly irrelevant. The psychology of Douglas Perry may have evolved, but the essence of the killer remained intact within Donna Perry. Detective Jim Dressback, however, remained unfazed. To him, Perry was a killer, and no amount of surgery or disguise could shield her from the consequences of her actions. Regardless of the lengths one might go to in an attempt to hide changing one's sex, altering one's appearance, or modifying one's hair eventually, justice would prevail. The truth could not be obscured by mere physical changes. What truly mattered was the DNA evidence that would unravel the threads of deception. Donna Perry and Douglas Perry were irrevocably linked. They were one and the same, the orchestrators of violence. Donna Perry emerged as an obsessive, transgender serial killer, and the law would not turn a blind eye to her actions. She was ultimately sentenced to life without parole. The reality of her fate was staggering, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can reside behind the most innocent of exteriors. Oh my God! The echoes of her crimes reverberate, leaving a haunting legacy of violence and tragedy.